Hey everyone, today we have another board run breakdown. This would be number 4, and we're going to talk about pressing. And basically, this could be considered like a pressing filter, a little checklist. You can see we're going to flesh this out a little bit on our choice of any pressing movement, hows and whys, without getting too far into any one category, basically from rehab all the way to high performance and everything in between a little bit with the benefits for hypertrophy and just kind of all around balance. So let's kind of walk through these kind of key pieces that ultimately really lead to this ROI, or this value at the bottom is going to be our big finisher here. And that really could be is value for the individual, not necessarily for the masses. I'll give you some of those areas that I really think are valuable. And as much as I'm not maybe the world's greatest presser, I've also had a lot of shoulder issues along the way, and neck and everything, from being, this coming through the lens of a thrower, especially. But again, I want this to apply or be something you can filter and use the principles for anything. But I have worked through these injuries repeatedly, from throwing my arm out in high school and college, pitching, quarterbacking, everything along the way, to where my shoulder, I could hardly do a push-up. So to come back from that without surgery, pretty proud of that. I feel like I have a lot I can add to this to flesh out, and I'm continuing to explore. It's like the pressing and throwing stones. I have put the most into those areas, if anything, because they're weaker links for me. So this little qualifier maybe for that, hopefully. Anyways, the symmetry, meaning side to side. Do you have an imbalance from side to side in a certain range of motion? Example, me, perfect case, I went in and got tested recently by one of my PT buddies, and we found I did have some external rotation and tricep out in these positions, kind of finishing my presses somewhat in the overhead press. I've known that for years. I've addressed it somewhat, but it's been a weaker link. My right side has become my less strong side by about 10%. Imagine most people would be the other way around when they're not totally beat up. If anything, the good side, or the dominant side, is going to be 5 to 10% different, and I'm okay with that. Say up to 10%. Especially, again, as coming from a thrower perspective, striking anything in that category too. Generally, you're going to be stronger on the dominant side. If you're not, that's an indicator. Or if something is just off in certain positions, maybe your bench press. Again, we could go into all the details. Your bench press is the same as your overhead press. That's going to tell you I've been in that kind of category too. Versus, the bench press should be at least, from a strict bench press to an overhead strict press, for, again, the majority of people, it's going to be at least 20%. I think we can easily say that 20-30% different. Some of the other skill-based things, we'll get into that, like where is that safety, range of motion. We want to talk about that a little bit too. How much range do we have available, and do we need to modify that? So say you have a lot of shoulder tightness, shoulder lat tightness, wherever that's coming from, where you're limited in the range at end range versus, for me, a lot of the time it was feeling really stiff and tight coming all the way down to my chest on a bench press. So I was able to modify that, use different handles. Hand position can really matter. That could fit into all this. What allows for that range of motion, and why do we need that? We'll start kind of breaking this down a little bit more too. Do we need full range of motion to get the best effect, the highest ROI value for our purpose? So things like, again, somebody with poor range of motion, things that are pressing out, we might just choose a single arm movement, doing like a 2-to-1 reps. If it's more than a 10% difference, we're going to use a single arm movement. It could start out, and I've actually been leaning into using things like the landmine quite a bit more, minimalist kind of movements. And I like to get people thinking and moving and pre-testing and checking in with different baseline pressing, like primal simple patterns. And I'll list these up here too. Crawling, especially backwards crawling. Again, it's one of the most simplistic movements. Is it pain-free? Does it look good on both sides? Balancing up. Another easy one would be get up, meaning the Turkish get up. I just like to shorten it to the get up. There's a lot of stability through the shoulders, through all of the get up positions. On the up arm, the down arm is actually doing a lot to push and pull and maneuver there too, but especially that looking at it as a pressing pattern, if we want to use it to as a pre-test. If something's painful on the get up, again, that could be indicative that we want to modify or really be careful with getting into some hot zones with our pressing, and horizontal pressing, more bench pressing versus vertical pressing. This kind of checks in and tests kind of everything along in that. And then we could go down the line a little bit, like a closed chain movement. If you don't know what closed chain is, it means you're in contact with the ground, you're not floating out here. So a bench press or something where we want to get more into the stability, we're going to kind of filter through these positions. Again, like a handstand push-up or something overhead, that would be okay too if you're familiar with those, and that, we want to keep this in mind. We're going to filter these through like the safety side of things too. But then we're going to look at like a bottoms up. Bottoms up press. So what that looks like is right in here, and we're able to stabilize down here and press straight through that end range position. Again, we could look for some sticky points where we're more unstable, and that could be where we would flesh this out and work on these symmetry, range of motion. Doesn't necessarily have to go in this order. These are just checkpoints to basically, again, decide, is that the right pressing pattern for me right now? What am I working on? Am I choosing this based on dogma, based on, everybody's been doing bench press since the beginning of time, and this is a high value exercise, versus, hey, maybe the bench press doesn't matter that much. And I'll give you that hint. Generally, throwers do not probably need to bench as much as they might think. And again, for me specifically, if it flares up my shoulder or I feel too stiff and tight in my upper body, and it's not allowing me to express that power, express that range of motion, or things are sore and tight. When we're sore, or more than a little sore, into this more pain discomfort pattern, and over time, if we're wearing down the body, wearing down the joint, there's less awareness, less stability in here because of the wear and tear, this safety, the joints getting all this misinformation, and the nervous system just not able to fire correctly at times. So, think about that. If you're just wearing yourself down, yeah, you might even get short-term benefits, but that's where I'm going to give you that hint. Bringing this more holistically and potentially spending more time, especially for me in season, these are my much more safe, effective go-tos for that. It could be, even as simple as an overhead carry, and I might be able to maintain that because I just don't tolerate those pressing patterns as well. And it's becoming more and more rampant as people spend more time, optimal texting position here and work environments. We need to spend time opening this up regardless and working on these fundamental patterns that I always talk about, that again, I won't get too into specifically, but I want to flesh this out a little bit more too. Do I have that range of motion to hit that safe position? Do I need to consider that? Again, maybe I have it on one arm, but it's so asymmetrical when I press, or I'm so much weaker on one arm. There's just no good reason to not, especially in our off-season time that we're talking about now too, go and shore up this weakness and enlist the help of a really good coach, or maybe ideally if you're in pain, the answer is always for coaches and for you as a person that's working out on your own, to go get help. If you're in pain, you flare that up every week, or you have more than a little bit of a twinge and an ache for a period of time, go get checked out. That's the number one, maybe the takeaway for some people at least. Don't just fight through it, because that pain is a signal that's probably been going on for quite a while. Shoulder impingement is kind of where this came out of as a question too, to flesh this out. Shoulder impingement, usually something or always something was going on for a period of time beforehand. It didn't just one day go bang. Potentially possible, but almost never the case from anything I've seen. There's so many other areas to correct and work on. And again, consider, hey, if you're doing this all day and that's your primary world, and then you're going to be a hero in the bench press, how many people do you know that can bench press hot and heavy into these 90% plus zones, these really dedicated bench press training cycles for periods of time? And again, what's the return on that investment as a thrower or a striker or just someone who wants all around healthy shoulders too? It's only going to make so much difference in our actual, the one event that I do find that it has some value really, or two events would be our stone throws, or our Braemar throw and our open stone. It's not going to hurt anything else. You hear different throwers talk about bench pressing, even helping them with caber. I don't know, maybe I'm missing out on something. There is a neurological component. So when we're training heavy, that's where the value, low demand, low neural demand versus, the high demand. So when we can add weight to something. We're going to recruit more, muscle fibers there. We can add complexity. Again, a bottoms up press, there's a much higher neurological demand because it takes all that coordination, all that stability into it. Bottoms up. Doing it bilateral. Sorry, I'm falling off. These are hard to see. Bilateral meaning you're doing two arms at a time. Yes, there's more total juice going through the system, but sometimes in some cases, if that one arm, again, if you have this imbalance stuff going on, it's going to be more effective to work on that one side and get the high amplitude on one side in more of a micro dose or a isolated area. None of this is working. I'm not advocating saying do true isolation work for your pressing, besides definitely doing some tricep work, especially with that more extended position here where we're getting a nice stretch into shoulder flexion. Overhead position is going to help develop our pressing overall and add basically to everything and anything in here as another little side piece of that too. So, where are we on this spectrum at any lift to think about where that lift fits? Touching on more stability exercises, something in there. Again, these all cover that quite a bit. That's where doing, like for me, doing some band work with eventually working into some pressing. Right now, I have a band going this way, holding me into this external rotation slightly in this scapular plane out here. That's a nice place to be. We could have like more stability and coordination. I do a lot with Indian clubs and maces. We could put that on this little list too. Clubs, mace, even though it's not a pure pressing pattern, these rotation patterns are going to help to bring in this stability, coordination. Make sure there's no weak links. I'll do another section on that and continue to add to our arsenal here as a theme for future areas, and we can cover any of these if you guys want to comment there and ask questions too. I'm happy to flesh any and all these out. This is just supposed to help us expand into some other areas too. Again, that stability, the bottoms up position of the kettlebell versus having the bell sitting here, having a kettlebell in the first place versus potentially a dumbbell is going to be negligible, but a little bit different in that position, right? Versus a machine, or a landmine is basically on more of the machine side of things. I don't have that plane where I need to stabilize in here forward and back too. So it's only making me work through here. So there's another element of stability. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That could allow me more of that neural demand in here because I'm able to add more weight to it. It's still a challenging enough position versus which I generally don't advocate, and a lot of people are not doing a lot of direct machine hammer strength type of stuff, yes, that could have a place. But if you don't have stability, the best analogy for that is firing a cannon out of a canoe versus firing it off of that battleship or firing it off of a hard, solid ground, right? The cannon's not going to fire, meaning our core is not there, the linkage to the shoulder, and that would be another test too. If somebody's really strong on something, maybe like a landmine or a machine press, and then they go to degrade down to some of these other positions. And again, we could break this down specifically. What can they do even on a bottoms up press is a simple way to test that too. Come up with a standard too. If somebody, like me, for example, if I can't bottoms up press that weight, I'm that weight up here, and I can't bottoms up press the 24 kilogram, which would be 53 pounds, and then I can go, put that in the rack position somehow, and then I'm able to press, say, over 40 kilograms, or almost double the weight. That would be a pretty extreme area. Or it can, vice versa. If you're overstable, or not say overstable, but you're plenty stable and you're not strong, you got that cannon on that great base, you have everything else set up, but you don't have enough powder in there, meaning horsepower, powder being the ability to recruit all those motor units, enough hypertrophy to get those contractile tissues working, and enough power in the system to move that weight, get that thing going. That is the case. It does potentially happen where somebody might be able to press that 24 kilo in the bottoms up position. Maybe they have really strong grip too, just advantageous for them. And then they might only press a 32 kilogram. Not necessarily a bad thing. Get up, for example, we always wanted to be able to do a get up. This is a strong first standard. I'm remembering that here for a second. With the weight we're gonna press, if we're gonna strict press that with the kettlebell, it's a great way to make sure, hey, if I can do a get up with it, I'm stable enough, I'm ready enough to press that thing. We don't have to get completely stuck on kettlebells, but they are a great tool for pressing and covering these areas. Backwards crawl, by the way, is crawling backwards either off the knees. I like to go up a hill, towing chains. I can make this super challenging, and it's a small range of motions, very let's say friendly, gentle enough on the shoulder, but again, it fits this higher neurological demand or very rich demand. So it feeds the body, I think, a lot better. It doesn't break you down. Again, the safety side of things, breaking down. A barbell bench press, there's not a lot of room to have that forgiving position where the body is able to kind of work around a little glitch or twinge in there too. And if I'm bouncing that bar off my chest and just that high demand, it just requires a lot of precision, a lot of discipline. A lot of people don't necessarily do it. They just have so many bad habits and expectations ground in. So the hint is probably to break this down into these more simplified, refreshing, high value, at least, especially in our off season, if it's well before our main preseason performance side of things too, building on that base, things like that. And then obvious things too is anything causing, if you're bench pressing and it's painful, again, you could modify the position. Generally, I would say go to something, check in, have this tested, go through, range of motion testing. Do I have good range of motion? Can I do things like an overhead squat without pain? Those are just some simple tests. Can I slide my arms up, back to the wall? Doing, various positions for my rotator cuff. Can I swing a club around? Clubs and maces, if that's got a twinge in the position or any other athletic positions, I have to address that, right? I get to address that first before I do a bunch of heavy pressing. Same could be true for rowing. Pressing tends to be the more common anterior shoulder issue here, again, more postural and related to everything from our breathing, posture positions, and just more dominant muscles on the front half that get tighter. Simply what is a very common cause or a big indicative direction that things get pulled into. So again, I think we touched on pain, discomfort, safety, having spotters. Having safety could also be do I have a good setup? Do I have a really good, if I'm at a home gym, do I have a great bench? Do I have a great setup where I have stability? The bars, goes without saying, very high risk exercise to do a bench press without safety spot or a really good spot. I would always choose both, especially if you're training a commercial gym, going up to a random person to ask them for a spot. You're kind of putting your life in their hands, I think, too. Hopefully that's obvious, common sense kind of stuff too. But again, all those layers, and then maybe touching on a few more specific lifts along the way that I especially like. Again, I mentioned the things like the landmine have a nice, again, more arc out in this plane. If I'm doing even sitting, standing, whatever, I tend to like standing. I tend to go towards the one arm version and work into that, especially if you have some history with your shoulders, more restorative time of year. You can do a lot with these get-ups and backwards crawl. It can become a more conditioning tool. Push-up variations can be great this time of year, making sure we're in that closed chain position. This would technically count as closed chain there with a backwards crawl. Our bottoms up position, that works a lot more of the stability side of things. Never hurts to train our grip there. All that is really coming alive. Doing some variations with different banded positions. That's what I'm going to be working into next, is probably bottoms up, a band pulling me this way, and I'm pressing into that stuff too. There's a lot of variation there. Addressing our tissue issues. Are we able to do some massage work, some prep work, open up these tissues here, really get things. And another term for this I like is the armoring effect. So are we in the armoring side of things? And yeah, this off-season time, yeah, we sure should be doing a lot more armoring. Range of motion armoring is to me a little bit different, but it could fit, generally anything hypertrophy, tendon, ligament stuff, that could count as armoring too. If I have a longer range of motion, I can get a big stretch in there too, maybe with dumbbells, taking those dumbbells through that full range. I can change my hand position where that feels better to me. I can potentially pause at the bottom position. That's going to give me that deep stretch and more tissue being worked there. So I'm basically armoring up those tendons, ligaments, using that real long range of motion. Potentially if you have a really tough restriction or range of motion, there are times when people may need to press through a shorter range to get through because they don't own this overhead position in that. But that's a little deeper dive into more of the PT pain discomfort side of things. Poor range of motion of the movement and range of motion of your ability to contract that. Anything that we're able to articulate our joints really well around that shoulder. If we're not, we're likely going to pay for that in some way. Again, same thing with this instability. If we have a lot of instability and or poor range of motion, poor ultimately that motor control, the stability really goes into this coordination, this neural demand, same realm here too. It's all just different words essentially for saying we have to have the brain connected to the whole system, the linkage. Muscles are just there to help, do what they're told by the nervous system, by the brain, ultimately down through everything through our spinal cord and our nervous system there too. So that's all part of that, higher demand. Working into more explosive stuff, again, that's going to have a higher neurological demand if I'm doing a med ball toss, or if I'm taking and doing a push, working into push press positions. We better cover these bases really nicely first. And again, I would err away from those a little bit more this time of year. If we're talking off season specifically for Highland Games, or a lot of time, work longer than you probably think on addressing these weaker points before we go up and add a lot of this more dynamic pressing. Doesn't mean you need to throw it out completely, but it should just, even if your shoulders are super healthy, neck and all that would be up in the same category. Consider keeping that very minimal, maybe 10% of our pressing volume and work for the week, and drill and get into this stuff. The clubs would be a nice segue into that with a little bit more power element to them, and I call it pulsing, where we have to react to that. It could be, like right behind me, I have a punching bag. I was hitting the bag for my warm up, more kind of my primers into that the other day too. So I think there's a lot of value to that. Anything where we're pushing out, sled, like different sled variations or plyo push-ups, things like that. That can be a nice place to build into, work into, especially once we've addressed these areas and we've brought our strength potential up. We're going to express that power a lot better, right? When we have a better base of strength, we're able to move more weight And then we're able to use less weight, sub-maximal stuff, and move it faster as long as we develop those qualities. We're guaranteed to get something out of that, but we're going to maximize that. Just like there are guys, depending on their leverage, partly too, but if they're able to express that power, they're able to get that impulse to fire and be twitchy, that person, all things being equal, may have a lesser bench press or able to express power. There are plenty of guys who only say have a 300-pound bench press, but they don't have anything particular with their leverage. Their technique is really good for one thing, but they're able to move that weight. And there's, again, some different tests with med ball throws, standing med ball throws versus comparing to bench press and things like that you can get into if you'd like to. Using tools like velocity-based training, if you have tools to measure velocity, that can be very helpful. And that's where you could use a bench press to do more explosive kind of movements if you choose to. Accommodating resistance like bands, chains, that could come in. Again, especially preferably in the later preseason phases. And one other thing to touch on, if you're choosing the bench press, I keep picking on the bench press, but it's the easiest target to relate to and go after, I think, too. If you're doing bench press and you're doing dynamic, explosive stuff, but you're doing heavy bench press and you're not rotating your movement patterns, a bit of, we call it specialized variety. If we're not rotating through our patterns, again, it could be for very, very high variety. Every week we could change our positions, even if we wanted to or needed to. This time of year we get bored pretty easily. We could rotate through these and kind of create a bit of a mix up or to roll the die, and we choose these patterns and we just work into and work through them, versus being very specialized. The other extreme would be somebody who's bench pressing. That's their, 80% of their pressing comes from bench pressing and or strict overhead pressing, or the common Highland Games theme would be a bench press one day a week, and or maybe it's the same day, but they're doing a push press variation. Those are the two extremes, and they're both valuable exercises overall. That's only going to help our throws, but are we getting more athletic? Is that applying? Ultimately, is it ending up with a high value, meaning did it fit our purpose? So, evaluate that, or find a way to evaluate that. How do you make that measurable? Yeah, my bench press went up. Well, my stone throw didn't go. Why was that? Did I not put in the work with the stone to, again, apply that strength, get more athletic? Rule of thumb there is a minimum about 15-pound increase for a bench press. This is old Brian Oldfield formula. So, take it for what it is. It's from, great thrower from the 70s. He talked about 15 pounds for every foot you add to your shot put, or for him to add to his shot put. Yes, he's a 75-foot shot putter. So maybe more or less for you, or maybe, say you're at just over a body weight bench press. So low for a thrower, male at least, a body weight bench press, and you add 15 pounds, and all things being equal, or maybe your technique improves, you might average or you might improve your stone throw by quite a bit more than that, versus somebody who's already at a 375 bench press and they add 15 pounds of that, the technique's already proficient. They might not see quite that carryover, that percentage carryover, but gives you a rougher estimate. And again, all things being equal, being strong in all these patterns, getting the brain some variety, some variability to this is going to armor up our body best, if we're talking about armoring more from that side rather than just having big monster pecs and good tendons overall. But if I'm only strong in this position, if I go outside of that or get anything coming at me life-wise or have a fall injury, if I'm not strong in all planes, the body does not want to, will not continue. If I just press in here and I never did anything overhead, I would be tight, weak, unstable. My body would not know what's going on up here. After even a few days, that starts to really change, let alone weeks or months. If I never went overhead or I had an overhead injury, my body wouldn't be able to cash that check. And again, as throwers, we need that dynamic range through all this range, all this full body expression of everything. So again, board room breakdown, check that out. Let me know if you have other questions, areas you want me to break down. Please comment, like, share, all the good stuff. Thanks, guys.